I was going to clubs before Studio 54, and I felt like I had arrived. So for a very long time, alcohol and drugs disguised itself as a party. I worked for Sesame Street, and the first time I did cocaine, I was in the Muppet dressing room. It was that kind of get down. Consequences, I never really dated any guy that I could have a real future with. I didn't have kids. I knew that the inside was getting to be so painful. Bill Wilson says on page 12, God will handle all problems. He'll manage all of our affairs, but it's imperative that we practice spiritual principles.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Donna. Hi Donna, thank you so much for joining me today, for being my guest on 12 Steps and 12 Questions. I'm really excited to speak to you and have you go through the 12 questions. Before we get to your introduction, I'd very quickly like to say that I'd like to thank the listener for being here, for showing courage that you're interested in this subject and in your own recovery. And I'm interested in hearing from people from fellowships other than CA and AA. So if you're a member of a different fellowship, and if you'd like to be on 12 Steps and 12 Questions, ping me an email on 12steps12questions@gmail.com, and that email is also in the show notes. And with that said, let's get to it. Donna, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Good morning or good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are listening. My name is Donna and I am an alcoholic. I have a lot of drugs in my story, but after going through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it was the alcohol that chose me. And in my story, you'll hear what I mean by that. My sobriety date is August 5th, 2000. I am real clear I did not stop drinking that day. There was a power that burst upon me that I felt that I would never have to drink again. And again, I'll get more into that as we go through these 12 questions. My home group is the Winter Park group. I am in Florida. I am a New York girl. I just happen to live in Florida. I do work with others. I have a sponsor and I have sponsees, and I take them through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's my responsibility to lead them to the God of their understanding, not manage their lives. So that's my way of my intro.
Lovely. Well put. Well put. So our first question is, Donna, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
Looking back, it's interesting in hindsight. In having insight, I have hindsight. And there was just a lot of chaos. My dad drank, my dad gambled, and my mom, she drank. She did not drink, but she was always very angry. So I never grew up really feeling very comfortable. There was always a lot of tension, a lot of arguing. So I grew up a very fearful child. There was, physical abuse. And I think, too often parents of a certain generation, they think it's okay to beat children, but it is a form of abuse. And so I grew up very frightened, very, 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 very fearful.
Yeah. I grew up in a really loud family, right? So there was a lot of yelling quite often. And I sometimes tend to think that my father was almost like a dry drunk in many ways in the way he behaved. And we tiptoed a lot around the house, right? So for me, that meant that a lot of the time I sort of withdrew into myself. How did you react to this tension in the house? To when you say you grew up fearful, how did you react to that?
I would immerse myself in reading. I loved to read. I felt like it was an escape for me. As a teenager, I started smoking pot because, pot and music, I would always feel like I was not where I was at. I couldn't be in the moment at any time of my life. The moment was too painful.
Okay. Now, if we just roll that back before we get to what is then our question 2, and when, drugs and alcohol were introduced into your life,
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I had a sister who was not born with this illness. So I can't say that it was because of my childhood, my lack of love that I craved, because we came from the same household and she was able to adjust to life. But I always took my anger out on her. I was an older sister and I would always torment her because I needed somebody to punish because I was so angry. And of course, I couldn't do it to my parents. So, they say hurt people hurt people. The good thing is that, I've since made amends to her and we speak every day now. She understands this illness. And I think what happens when people see that we become recovered, they see the effects of when we are willing to go to any length and immerse ourselves in the 12 steps, because there's a transformation that takes place that our families get to see, and then we can be part of the family, not apart from. Yeah. I was always apart from.
I think if I look back at my own childhood and how that my illness manifested early on, I think it's really interesting, because I don't ask this question because I think I want to delve into whether it's genetic or not, or nature or nurture. The book is very clear on this. The first step is very clear. It doesn't say any of that. It just says we admit that we were powerless. It's an admittance of powerlessness. So there's no need to delve into that. I just like to get a little bit of background about the person that I'm speaking to, and that is why I think this question is interesting and important for this podcast. You say you're a New York girl, so there's lots of stuff for us Europeans. Take us there just for a moment, what it was like.
Well, see, I grew up in the 70s. I graduated from high school in 1974, and there was a lot going on in the 70s. Oh, there was women's rights, there was the pill, there were underground clubs. I was going to clubs before Studio 54. My graduation night from high school in 1974, someone took me to an underground club, and I was blown away. I mean, the music, and, there was amyl nitrate. You can smell the poppers, and it was just this massive dance floor and this music, and I felt like I had arrived. So for a very long time, alcohol and drugs disguised itself as a party. Because back then, you could not go to a party and there wasn't a bowl of cocaine out. I worked for Sesame Street, and the first time I did cocaine, I was in the Muppet dressing room. Now, I'm not going to tell you which Muppet, but it was that kind of get down back in the day.
A true Muppet show indeed. Now, this kind of crosses really into our second question, which is, what did the moment you first got hooked, what did the fun times look like? And I always like to think that we don't get hooked on stuff unless we have a good time first. That may not always be true, but it certainly is true for a lot of addicts and alcoholics, right? So,
well, like I said, I love to party. I danced hustle.
What's that mean?
Hustle dancing. It's a form of dancing. It's like ballroom dancing.
Right.
And so I would compete in contests. I danced salsa. So for me, it was dancing. Mm-hmm. But see, the thing is that I could never dance unless I had a drink. I could never dance unless I had some pot, because I was always concerned about what people were thinking. So I never really was ever able to really execute, because, and I'm no different from most of the human race. I worry about what people think about me. But I don't know whether, being an alcoholic, my concern about what other people think is amplified. I don't know, but I just knew that my whole existence was based on you liking me, you loving me, you appreciating me, you recognize me. Mm-hmm. And so I never could be. It's interesting. We're all born with gifts. We're all born with a certain personality. But it's this identity that I created. I felt like I can only be okay if other people validated me.
Mm-hmm. So there's an emotional dependency there, isn't there?
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I started back dancing again, and I realized that I am so free today that my execution, I feel like I'm dancing from within out. See, I lived my life outside in. everything outside of me had to be in alignment for me to be okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, the fun times, did you have... So here we are, it's the 70s. You grew up a bit of a fearful child, as you said, and you seem to be quite concerned with what other people think of you, to a degree that might be a bit more amplified, as you said. And you making your first experiences with drink, with drugs, and so on. Did you have any idea that this was doing something for you that you couldn't do for yourself, or was it all just a big party and it didn't matter?
It's interesting because I didn't want anything to matter. Like it gave me this false sense of freedom. It gave me this ability to just be, to just not give a damn. Because, I mean, the people I was around people that were seemed to be, had their acts together. And the only way that I felt that I can belong was I had to be no inhibition.
Mm-hmm.
And so the alcohol and the drugs really helped me to fit in. So you go, and then it's interesting because I'm going to A-list parties. By the end, I'm going to B-list parties, and then I'm not even going to parties. I'm sitting up in some crack den.
Yeah. Now, it's obviously, as we said, what other people said to you really mattered, and what they thought about you really mattered. And did that influence your other choices in life, where you went to college, or if you went to college, and all those other things? Was that a big deal?
Well, I didn't go to college because I wanted to get out of my parents' home, so I just wanted independence. And I didn't have parents that were very engaged in my future because they were caught up in their own life. And it's interesting that, now that, I've done inventory, I get to see that, most human beings are selfish and self-centered. It's not an attribute that's just for alcoholics and addicts. When we look at the bedevilments, it says human problems, not alcohol problems. And so I wanted to get away. I just wanted freedom. I wanted to be, I didn't want to have to listen to any rules and regulations because I became a very disobedient child because my mother was very strict. And it's interesting because I felt like I was failing because she wanted me to be the version of me she wanted me to be. And she's more conservative. I'm more free-spirited. So I felt like I was failing because I'm trying to be how you want me to be, but I can't seem to pull it off. And then I got to a place and I said, you know what? I'm not even going to bother. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. And eventually you'll get off my back.
It sounds, I'm making a really obvious point here, but forgive me though. It sounds as if everything was very normalized. So the use of drugs and alcohol and so on and so forth was really normalized in the 70s in New York. Duh.
Yeah, it was normalized for the crowd that I gravitated to. Right. See, there were people that were on a trajectory of a life that was going to sustain them, going to college, thinking about their careers, choosing men that had their acts together so that there was a future. Because of my not feeling, see, it's interesting because I never was tapped into who I really was, so I made choices that I felt that I could be okay with. Like I always chose men that had potential. Like I didn't choose men that were successful, confident, because I didn't think they would want to be with me. So I always chose people that I felt that didn't make me feel too afraid. And then the backside of it is I lived the life of at least. I lived my life very small because I would convince myself, well, at least, because I really wanted more. I wanted so much more for my life, but I couldn't pull it off. I couldn't get there. So I convinced myself that where I was at was sufficient.
Right. And alcohol and drugs probably help with that.
Right.
In maybe a little bit more detail before we move on to the next question, what did that look like?
Well, in the beginning, I started drinking when I was 14. So of course, you can't drink, continuously.
No.
In high school, I would go to work. I would go to school. I would smoke a joint on the way to school. That became normal. Like smoking pot became like an everyday thing. I would wake up to feel the freedom of how I felt when I smoked pot.
And then into your 20s and so on.
My 20s. Well, then, I was drinking, and then it's interesting because I didn't like to black out. So I discovered that if I can sniff some, cocaine, I can continue to drink. I didn't realize that the craving for alcohol could last for days with me. And so I would sniff cocaine so I can stay up. And because it was so many after hours, I knew every after hours below 59th Street. And I would hang out from Thursday to Sunday because I always had to make sure I had money because I was working. I was working down on Wall Street. And so I was making a decent income. And it's interesting because that decent income, really all it did was support my alcohol and drug habit. Like I wasn't saving any money. I was living paycheck to paycheck.
Do you know what I think is interesting is if someone might have seen you from the outside, right? People would have probably thought, hey, this girl's got it together, right? She's going to the right parties. Yeah. She's going to the right parties, got a job on Wall Street. Yeah. There's nothing to suggest that you might struggle with any of this.
No, and the thing is, there was a lot of doors that opened up for me. I told you I worked at Sesame Street, and how I got that job, I didn't even apply for the job. I was a receptionist. It was my first job out of high school. I was a receptionist, and I always dressed kind of funky and creative. And the general manager who ran the company, he would see me every day, and it's like, why are you in insurance? He says, you should be someplace more creative. And he made a phone call. And the next thing I knew, I talked to someone and I got a job working at Sesame Street. It's interesting because that seemed to be how my life went. People saw I was on the cover of a hair magazine, and it was so interesting because after the photo shoot, there were so many people that were looking at me as I was walking down the block. I couldn't deal with people looking at me, so I ducked in a doorway and wiped the makeup off.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The last opportunity before I started working in bars and restaurants, I was working at the New York Times. No, I was working at a radio station owned by the New York Times, WQXR. And they had this opportunity for me at the New York Times, and they said, but you have to take a drug test. And I just froze and I panicked, and I realized that drinking and drugging is really interfering with my life. And so I tried to commit suicide because I was so tired of not being able to get past where I was at. Doors would open up, and I literally would just kind of like step in, and I would look, and I'd be so frightened. I remember I worked at Sesame Street, and I had an opportunity to choreograph a dance routine with two of the actors, and they rented this studio, and I'm like 19, 20 years old. I'm walking in the hallway, and I see the American Ballet on this room and the Joffrey Ballet, and I'm thinking to myself, why am I here? And the woman who I had to teach was deaf. So think about the opportunity that I was able to step into. I had to teach her how to dance by her feeling the vibrations of the amplifier on the floor. That's how she kept in time. And it came time to tape it, and the director puts his arm on my shoulder, and everybody's on the set because they're excited for me because I'm a staff member and I have this opportunity. It's a big deal. And John goes, okay, Donna, where do you want the camera angles? And I froze. I felt like the biggest loser because I didn't think about choreographing for camera angles. Instead of realizing, wow, this is an opportunity that I can ask the director, you know what, John, I didn't choreograph. Well, perhaps I could have been on the spot and said, well, he's gonna dip her here. So maybe if he dips her, maybe that can be a close-up. Like, I could not step into the opportunity, and I just felt like the biggest loser. And that's not the reason why I left, but I never was on a direct path. I kept having a lot of starts, and then I went to Wall Street, and Wall Street was a mess. I mean, I was working at nights, and I'm putting cocaine in cigarettes and smoking, and it's just crazy. I mean, the progression of the illness just really had me in its grips.
Sure. And that brings us to question 3. What were your worst consequences? And finally, your rock bottom. Now, I'm quite aware that this covers quite often, not for everybody, but quite often this covers quite a long period of time, because depending on how long we stay in the madness and so on. But nonetheless, what were your worst consequences? And finally, your rock bottom, if you had such a thing.
Well, I mean, I think every consequence was a consequence. I couldn't name them. And the thing, at the time, I didn't even see them as consequences.
So no
it's
awareness.
Interesting. My mind hid the truth from me. The only thing I was aware of that I have to keep trying. I had so many next times. Next time will be different. I've been 86th from one club 3 times. You would think I would realize, you know what, Donna, they don't want you here. Maybe, Donna, you're talking too much. And I lived a very deceitful, manipulative life. I'd wait until enough time went by and then I would always befriend the bouncers. I mean, I just was finding my way I manipulated my way through life. Consequences, I mean, I never really dated any guy that I could have a real future with. I didn't have kids. Consequences. See, the thing is that the consequences outside of me weren't sufficient. I didn't see them as consequences. I think really what started to make me realize, I knew that the inside was getting to be so painful. Because, see, I never say I lost things due to my drinking and driving. I gave things away. Purposefully, I wasn't paying my rent because I needed money for drugs. Why am I going to pay my rent? I'll figure out how to get the money when I get the money. So the consequences wasn't never going to be sufficient. It was how I was feeling inwardly. My bottom, my last day, I had 50 cents in my pocket. I had 50 cents in my pocket more than once. But I just remember I was too exhausted to think about another next time. Because I would go to bed shaking, trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to get out of this jam? Before I went to sleep, I had to figure out how I was going to manipulate the next day.
Mm. In order to be able to procure enough drugs, procure enough alcohol.
Yeah, I need who am I going to get money from? I can't get money from them because I owe them and I can't go over here. And I'm all of this before I can go to sleep, man. And this particular day, all I know, it was hot. And I didn't have money to get on the subway or the bus. And I had to beg the bus driver and the token booth clerk to get me on the bus. Now, in hindsight, I realize it was their compassion. They were so compassionate, and they didn't know what was going to happen to me later on that day. And that's when I realized that the only thing that God wants from us is to just be available, because we don't know how what we do for another person, how that fits into the rest of their life.
Of course.
I'm so grateful for those 2 men.
Yeah.
And that was my bottom. I just stopped. My bottom was I just stopped trying.
Yeah. What state were you in? Were you still holding down a job at that point, or were you destitute?
I was living with my mom, 44 years old. I don't have a key. She took the key away because she didn't trust me. And, the selfish and self-centered person I was so angry at her. How dare you not give me a key? I couldn't even see it. It's interesting because I never concerned myself about what my mother was going through when she didn't know where I was for 4 and 5 days. I was only concerned with what she was going to say when I rang the doorbell.
Yeah, if you were going to get into trouble, if there was going to be an altercation.
It was all about me. Me. Now, it's interesting. I lost my cat very recently, and I didn't know where my cat was, and all I can do was lean in. I kept leaning into the power within for comfort, and for the first time, I thought about my mom. And for the first time, I asked myself, was my mom leaning in when she didn't know where I was all those times? And I wept. So we get to understand, not only are we introduced to spiritual principles, we get to experience what compassion feels like, joy feels like, love feels like. So yeah, that day, that was the day, and I knew, and somebody told me that our Creator can hold whatever his or her breath for a very long time as he or she waits for us to want.
Well, can you describe for those people who are still searching, perhaps? Can you describe your drinking and using maybe in the last year or so? What that looked like?
The last year, well, it was not about ease and comfort. I forgot what ease and comfort was really all about. I think in the beginning it was ease and comfort. I drank when I didn't even want to drink. Because if I have $20 in my pocket and I'm going out, I'm not going out for ease and comfort, because $20 is not enough for ease and comfort.
Well, no. Yeah.
So I was going out just to forget, and that's why, crack was such a powerful drug for me, because no thought went in, no thought went out. I just wanted to sit numb and just not think.
Oblivion.
I just wanted oblivion there.
Yeah, yeah. Just a quick word, if you don't mind, on crack. I'm assuming, if I'm getting my timings right, this must have been the crack epidemic in the late 80s? Am I getting this right?
Well, back then we were calling it freebase.
Oh.
Freebase.
Okay.
We were bougie, we were cooking it up ourselves, and
yeah.
Not everybody was really, smoking back then. But the first time, I just loved it because I can just sit back and just
zone out.
Just zone out.
Yeah, yeah. Did you, at some point or another, when you're doing that kind of stuff, which is very far away and removed from any kind of Wall Street respectability or anything like that, right? Where you can maybe, if you can still sipping wine, it may just look like you're not an alcoholic. When you're smoking crack or freebasing or whatever, there's very little veil of respectability left. Did you not think to yourself, fucking hell, how low I've sunk or anything like that?
No, because not in the beginning, because like I said, the only people that were smoking were people that had money.
Right, okay. Yeah. So that's a good measure.
And drug dealers.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
It wasn't a low life. And when it got to the point, it's interesting that as much as I was so disobedient with my parents, there was an invisible line that I did not cross. I think sometimes we don't realize that we may not listen, we may not obey, but I think everything that we have been introduced to, whatever principles, whatever right and wrong, morals, for me, it kind of kicked in, and I knew, okay, if I continue, I'm crossing a line that there's no return. And so I am grateful. I am grateful for my family.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting how this, even though we may not get on with them or we feel all sorts of things about them, there's somehow that there's a link there that sometimes keeps us just on the right side of things, or makes us return there, right? Even if we may have massive issues with our birth families.
That's correct.
Yeah. So our question 4, and we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier. Our question 4 is, at your worst, did you ever want to die?
I sure did. I drank a big bottle of cough medicine. I didn't want to wake up. And this was when I knew that I couldn't go for that job at the New York Times. And I saw this life I was living. I would go to work with no sleep. I never had money. The only people I was hanging out with were people like me, just drugging and drinking, and I wanted to stop and I couldn't stop. But it's interesting, that was 10 years before August 5th, 2000. So even the threat of suicide was not enough for me to see that I was powerless.
And maybe a couple of years after that, how did you view that event?
I didn't even think about it.
Right.
My mind has a convenient way of not letting me see the things that I need to see.
Yeah.
So I stopped relying on it.
Mm-hmm.
So what did I do? Okay, well, let me see what else I can try. So I did a geographic move. I kept trying different things. And I realized today that I was not supposed to die. That was supposed to be part of my journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I I always say this, and I think it's important to any listener out there. If you feel like it'd be better that you weren't around, if you feel that you're at your lowest and that you're considering suicide, speak up, speak out. There are people there to help. There are national helplines you can call an ambulance, do something. It doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to be in so much pain. But it's an important part of most of our stories. So it is important that we talk about it, because it is a progressive illness and it will lead us there, if we persist with it long enough.
Right. And I want people not to feel ashamed that this illness brought them to the brink of wanting to die. And I don't know what question this is going to come up, but, we do die, but not a physical death.
No. And we'll come to that. We will come to that. Question 5 is, what other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms? Or did you try any methods?
No. So I did this geographic move, and it was the first time I admitted to my family that I had a problem. But I wasn't done. Like, I knew I had a problem with cocaine, but I couldn't see that I had a problem with alcohol. My mind hid that truth from me. And so I left from the Midwest and I went back home to New York. And so the stipulation was I had to go and do something. So I went to an outpatient program. And I learned a lot of the, snappy one-liners. I learned how to say, I'm just here for today, because I was still drinking. But I knew in my heart, I didn't think I was done, because I was still drinking, because I thought that I just didn't want to do the drugs. But I had no idea that I was an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm. So you saw yourself as someone who had a cocaine or a crack problem, rather than someone who had an alcohol problem.
Couldn't see it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the idea of total sobriety must have been an alien concept at the time.
Yeah, because I wasn't going to AA, because at the time that just seemed like if you go to AA, you have to admit the admission of really having a problem. It was I wasn't there. Like, I didn't go to AA because I thought I had a problem or it was a recommendation. I went to AA when there was nothing left to try.
Right. Okay. So did you not try? You tried little moderation. Then this is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I did it for my family.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because I'm still drinking, and then there was somebody else in the program, and he took me uptown to Harlem, and all of a sudden I ran into people smoking crack, and it was a wrap. I was off again, and it was only a 9-month run, but that was a run of all runs.
Our question 6 is, when you came into the rooms finally, did you struggle with the work?
Because I knew that something powerful happened to me on August 5th, 2000. I knew
Walk us through that a little bit then, if you don't mind.
Okay, so I just knew, like, something burst upon me, and I knew in that next moment I never had to drink a drug again. And I knew, I felt from that point forward, I allowed myself to be led. See, I didn't have any ID. I probably dropped it in the after hours or in a cab. But I knew to go in a phone book and look for a detox. Like, how did I know how to do that? Like, I just knew to go look for a detox. In hindsight, I realized that I did the one thing. See, I couldn't do anything without drinking beforehand. I always got ready by having a drink. How is it that I get on a bus, I get on the subway, and I take myself to a detox, and I didn't stop at the liquor store to get a drink. I didn't jump off the train when I knew that there was an after hours that I can go and get a drink and get a drug. I did all of that sober. So I know that the only way I did that was the obsession was lifted. And then I was in a therapeutic community for 18 months, and the thought of a drink never occurred. And it wasn't a 12-step program. And I couldn't see, wait a minute, why am I not thinking about, it wasn't until I heard this woman share in AA, and the reason why AA was so powerful, because I felt the love when I walked in the room. There was no love where I was at.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
Just for me to understand, the listeners to get this right. So you were in this facility, in this detox/rehab facility for, you said, 18 months. It wasn't a 12-step facility. And then after that, you went to a AA.
Right. Because they were about to close the house. And when they close the house, you can't do anything but go to work and go to meetings, and I wasn't working yet. And so when I walked in the rooms, I saw the difference. I felt the love. And it's interesting because I don't think it matters what we do the 23 hours of the day, but for that 1 hour, collectively, everyone's spirit is in that room. And I felt it. And in the beginning, I heard a lot of drunkalogs, and I hee-heed and I kee-keed and laughed along, but I was getting a little nervous because I was about to graduate this therapeutic community, and I didn't know how I was going to go back and live my life. I like, what did I just do? But I heard a woman share, and she shared what she was like, what happened, and what she's like now, and what she was like, I still was like, and I heard it. I heard the message. And I believe that on August 5th, 2000, I was brought into consciousness.
Yeah. But obviously, on August 5th, 2000, you wouldn't have been able to use those words or explain
I had to be in this program. I had to connect with other people on a spiritual path so that I can see that I didn't stop drinking. I didn't have the power to stay stopped. I stopped many times, but couldn't stay stopped. How did I get on that bus and that train? How did I, for 18 months, I didn't obsess about a drink? I know that it wasn't me. I didn't miraculously all of a sudden acquire power. If that's the case, I would have done it long time ago. And I even know August 5th, if it was up to me, I would have surrendered August 4th. So I don't even think on my own I surrendered. I don't think I didn't say, well, I'm going to surrender right now.
No, it happened to you.
It just happened to me. And I think because I was at a place like Bill, for those of you that are in the big book, Dr. Silkworth says that we're at the gates of hell. I had to have enough humility. I felt like I was walking down the block with my head bowed, like I can't anymore.
My moment of surrender is also happened to me. I think that's what it is. You don't really look for it, do you? And I overdosed and ambulance, the whole 9 yards, and there's no better place, I suppose, than a proper step one than in the accident and emergency department of a hospital. And nonetheless, though, when I then, after that, went into the rooms and decided, okay, this is the only thing that I have got left to do, the only thing that I can possibly do, I still took exception with the word God because I had a lot of prejudice. But you, from what you were saying, you didn't.
I didn't see. The thing is, I didn't know it was God. I just knew that something happened. See, it's interesting because even when I heard Chris share in the meeting, I know she had something, but I didn't know it was God. If I had known it was God, maybe I would have said, I don't know if I'm down with that. But I wasn't so concerned with what she had that transformed her. I just saw the transformation. I knew that there was something that she had been doing that makes her different than what she was like.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you for that explanation. I really wanted to dig deep into that. I think it's such an important point in all of our stories, really. Question 7 is, how do you experience your higher power today? This is also a good point to share some God moments if you wanted to.
All right. So 23 years later, going on 24 by God's grace, if I live to August, every day I say, I'm willing to die to self so that God can live life in and through me. I'm at a place that I realize that I'm not separated from God. I never was separated from God. I had to do the 12 steps, the work in the 12 steps to see what was separating me from me. What was this thinking, this belief system that had me feel like I had to live life outside in, that I couldn't see that what's in me is the power. What's in me is the spirit. And so I now live my life like God and I are one.
Okay. Now, thinking of those who may be just in a month or, a few weeks or so, and you hear, and I've heard this, and it's something that I say sometimes as well, you hear die to self.
Die to my thinking. Die to my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It is so freeing when I tell myself, I don't know. The only thing I'm clear on is the reliance upon this power and be of service to others. Whether it's people in the fellowship, my family, because on my own thinking, I don't think with compassion. I don't think with love. I don't think with understanding. I don't think with forgiveness. My mind is focusing on people's behavior and personalities, and all it does is make me judge myself. If you are unkind to me, if you say something that is flippant or I take as critical, I'm crushed. Your behavior made me feel who I think I am based on how your treatment of me. There's something that happens that when you're willing to live inwardly, and it's a process, guys. I mean, there's no way that I can explain this. You've got to experience it. This is not knowledge, and this is why sometimes I have a hard time explaining it, because my mind cannot explain what it's not manufacturing. I can come close to try to explain, and that's why I have to read spiritual literature, because I need words, because this is a whole new way of life. For those of you that are in the big book, count how many times they use the word new life, new foundation, new. All I know is my same old okie doke. I don't know how to be one with you. I don't know how to look at you and see, perhaps the reason why you're angry is because inside you're hurting. My ego doesn't care about your inside. My ego cares about how you treat me. And so when I'm in this oneness, and how do I realize I'm one with God? When I realize I'm one with you. When I do inventory, I get to see, wait a minute. I'm just like the rest of the human race. We're all trying to be the best human beings we can be, limited. We all are judgmental. We all are fearful. We all are, you name it. We all share the same human problems. And so when I'm one with this power, I get to see you from an entirely different perspective. Less judgment, more oneness. And I think that's the beauty. To me, I think everything I went through was for me to be right here, right now, and see that I'm one with all.
Wonderfully put. Thank you. Question 8. Which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you? So let's think back to the first time you did them.
Okay, all right. So it's interesting because I was willing. See, I came in and I didn't sit in the fellowship, just sit in the fellowship. I heard Chris. She shared what she was like, what happened, and what she's like today. And what happened is she talked about going through the work. When I say the work, the 12 steps. And she asked me, she said, Donna, are you willing to go to any length to never drink again? And I had been hearing, just don't drink for today. I'm 45 years old. I don't want to think about a drink every day. I don't want to think about alcohol. And that's what I was hearing. Just don't drink for today. You kidding me? I got to think about a drink? Ah. So when she said, am I willing to go to any length never to drink again? I said yes. And in my first year in AA, I found myself going through the big book with a couple that had a big book workshop. And they took me through the book line by line. And we didn't have recordings back then. So we were like I felt like I was down her throat. Like every time she said something, I would. And so now my shares are different. And now people want me to, they're like, what are you doing? And I told them I'm in the book, and they're like, well, can you take me through the book? And I wasn't even past step 3. And I'm like, Loretta, what am I going to do? Like, people want me to take them through the book. And she said, if you're a page ahead, you know more than them, take them through the book. So here it is, my first time in the book. I'm sitting in coffee shops with men and women and reading the big book with them, because I knew there's something I felt that what Loretta was doing, that I was supposed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was willing to go to any length, because as I read the book, we say the set aside prayer. A lot of people, it's God set aside everything I think I know. And all of a sudden, I wasn't just reading the book. I was connecting with the words in the book. I was seeing the meaning behind the word.
Mm. But did
And
you
so,
struggle? Sorry to interrupt you, but
did I struggle? I loitered. I loitered like everybody else in step 4. You think my ego wanted me to pick up that damn pen? Hell no. My mind, I'd sit down and write inventory. My mind would tell me, so here it is. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path, but we loiter along the way. And why do we loiter? We loiter because of our intellect. Oh, this doesn't look right. I don't know if I'm doing this correct. Or our emotion. We get too angry. We're too afraid. Or my ego will tell me that everything else is more important than seeking freedom. And this is why it's important to have the fellowship around us, so that, and good sponsorship, so that we can encourage each other to write. Because when I was not writing, it was real uncomfortable. Why? How did my willingness to believe? I've always had a willingness to believe, because I saw evidence that there were people that were doing this deal that I wanted what they had. I was around them and I didn't even speak. I'm like, who are these people? What do they have? This is different than most people in AA. And so they were my light. They were like standing on the sidelines of a marathon and like, come on, Donna, come on, Donna, come on. And the first time I did my 3rd step, I was willing. I was always willing. But it wasn't until I was doing my fear inventory, it hit me on such a level. I realized, wait a minute, this whole thing is about losing control, total control. And it was my first honest prayer. I remember I was standing in my mom's dining room, looking out the window, and I was like, okay, God, I'm willing. I'm willing to go to any length. I'm willing to let go of control, but I feel like I'm up on a cliff. And I'm willing to jump, but are you going to be there to catch me? That was my first honest prayer. After 13 years of Catholic school, that was my first honest prayer, and it was just a conversation with God. Because it hit me, wait a minute. I die to self and it's all God. Whoa, I'm willing, God, but are you real? And then every time I wrote inventory, I would say the prayer, God, please set aside everything I think I know. And I would put my pen to the paper and names would come up that I know were not coming from my thinking mind. So I knew I wasn't thinking about this. And then I was able to see people from a different perspective, and I realized that it started the forgiveness process. I started to see that people, some of us are victims of generational dysfunction, generation after generation. And I was no more or no less than them. So God revealed himself in every step. I wrote a letter. I did my first 3rd step, and I wrote a letter from God. I was willing to believe when I put my pen to paper that God was responding to my 3rd step. And the prayer was powerful. The prayer ended, my child, I've been waiting for you. I wept. I was willing to believe. See, it's interesting because there's nothing that we need to figure out. My starting point that God is, am I willing to believe that God is? Am I willing to believe that what happened to me on August 5th, 2000 was not of my own making? And then I can move from that point.
Great. Question 9. Which character defects give you most trouble?
Judgment. Judgment. It's interesting because just wanting the willingness to be free. So I have this judgment. I can always look at you, so I judge me. Either I'm better than, or see, I'm not good enough. And I wrote inventory, and it was real apparent that I'm still looking at people's behavior and personality. I'm not looking at them as children of God. And then I'm reading spiritual literature because it's part of my 11th and 10th step. And all of a sudden, I'm reading things that pertain to judgment. There's no coincidence in that. And I realized that if I'm one with God, I got to be one with all. So how am I still judging? So I did my 5th step, and I saw all these things that want to keep me separated from you. And I asked God to please remove these behaviors, please remove judgment. And you know what? The opposite of all of the judgment and thinking I'm better than, it's be one with all, Donna. I was even judging people in AA. This one doesn't have a spiritual message. And then I also was able to see that, you know what, not everybody is down with hearing about a spiritual message when they come in. If everybody had a spiritual message, how many people would walk out the door? So we need all kind of messengers. We need people that can talk about the first principles of truth. You know, get a home group, you know, get a sponsor, you know, work the 12 steps. It's things that are not going to make a person feel uncomfortable. Because if they're not been brought into consciousness, they're not going to want to hear about God. And so somebody like me, I'm just in position for the person that has been brought into consciousness still hear me. And so it's interesting because I was willing to be free that all these things about judgment, boom, 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 boom. And so now I can look at people more so because my ego, I'm never going to be perfect. I realize that I'm so human at times. Like, God, how can you work in and through me because I'm such a human being? But less and less do those things become a way for me.
Question 10. What is the best thing recovery has given you?
Enable me to be. Just to be. Just to be. You know how freeing it is to be able to say, I don't know. I don't know. I've had such powerful experiences lately. And each step of the way, I don't know. And I was walking the other day, and what it feels like sometimes, because it's very uncomfortable at times, trust me, it's not easy breezy, but it's like each step, I'm stepping, and then I get to a place, and my foot is up, and I don't know where to step. And just imagine standing on one foot with your leg up. It's kind of shaky. Like, what am I going to do? I gotta put this foot down, but I don't know where to put the foot down. So can I be okay while I'm trying to keep my balance until I know where to put that foot? And that's how I feel sometimes when I don't know. Can I sit in the uncomfortability of not knowing? And then something happens that I just kind of know. I just kind of know. And I notice that when I'm in a place of not knowing, and what I mean by, okay, I know that I have to work. I know that I have to work with others. I know that I got to take care of my cats. I mean, I know these things, but it's the execution. It's the moment by moment. It's the day by day that I don't manage. And I find that when I am that way of not knowing, I'm connecting more with people. I was in a meeting and my share, oh my God, I brought myself to tears. I feel like if I'm out of the way, God has more space. For those of you that are in the big book, Bill Wilson says on page 12, God will handle all problems. He'll manage all of our affairs, but it's imperative that we practice spiritual principles. So if God's managing all my life and all my affairs, then what is there for me to do except rely on God so that God can live my life? For those of you that are not here yet, please, it's my hope that what happened to me happens to everyone. If you're hearing me, you might be just like me, a seeker. I've been a seeker all of my life. I did not know that what I was going to find was a relationship with God. I did not know that because of my addiction, that was going to be the beginning of my journey seeking what I've always been seeking. So I'm sure that there's some people that this is resonating with them. For those that's not, just keep staying.
Yeah.
All right, next question.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you kind of answered the question, really, actually, it's, quite almost even before I asked it. And the question is, question 11, what would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
Definitely need to get in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's 4 steps on step 1. And leading up to step 2, you need to be asking yourself, did I use like this, or did I drink like this? Did I felt like this? You've got to ask yourself those questions, because if you're just sitting in any fellowship, you don't know what your truth is. Because if I just sat in the fellowship and looked at step 1, I'm powerless over alcohol, my life is unmanageable, my mind is not letting me see to the depths of the powerlessness. My mind will say, okay, yeah, you're powerless. Yeah. And then I'll sit around, and then I'll go out and I think that I'm powerless, and that's fine. And then I pick up again. No, I need to see how powerful this illness is and look at the words that are being used. Bill said, how did you escape, Ebby? He said he was never going to beat the game. He uses the word battle. He says alcohol was our master. I need to look at this illness as being so damn powerful that there's no way I can combat it on my own. And that if I'm not fighting it, who's fighting it for me? Maybe the power is already at work and I don't even realize it.
Mm-hmm. I do actually, interestingly, I do remember at the, just shortly before I came into the rooms, as I was hearing, funny enough, a podcast, and in there they were saying things about powerlessness and this and that and the other. And the only thing that really happened was that I felt like, oh yeah, that's what it is. I'm powerless, fine. And that actually just led to more drinking and using first and foremost.
Exactly. So it says that this 12 steps that we work, it's revolutionary and drastic. We need something so revolutionary and drastic, because the same mind that hid the truth from me will continue to hide the truth from me. There's a story of Fred, and he's getting ready for dinner, and the thought comes, like it always comes, oh, a couple of cocktails before dinner will be fine. And he says, that's it, that's all. That's all my mind's going to tell me. Oh, yeah, Donna, go have a drink. Well, what about the rest of the thoughts? What about, well, you remember, now you can have this drink, but last week when you drank, you spent up all your money. Remember, last week you got 86. So I get to see, as I go through this book, you got to be kidding me. Why am I now just seeing how powerful alcohol is in all my life? I'm living my life and I couldn't see the truth. That's what gave me the willingness to believe that something was already happening in me.
Yeah. And that brings us to our question 12, which is, what you want that something, in inverted commas, your higher power to say to you at the pearly gates.
Job well done. Job well done. My sponsor, I have a new sponsor, his name is Mike, and Gwen, she was 91. And she was 90, and she said she knows that God's going to take her soon. But she had a newcomer. Can you imagine 90 with a newcomer? And she says, I want to take her down this path a little further before, I leave her. And she said something that made me sit with this consideration. See, I sit with a lot of things to consider today. And she said, I hope in my next life, I come back with pain, misery, and despair once again, so I can continue to be of use to God. And I sat with that, because I had never heard anybody say that they would want to come back with the same kind of pain. Maybe not an alcoholic, maybe it's pain of another nature. We're not the only ones, the only human beings that are faced with pain in their lives.
Although we like to think so.
I know, right? That's how we are. We're so unique. And I sat and I realized, you know what, everything that I know, that I too would want to come back to be on the firing line, to lead people to God. Because that's really what we do here. We're not here to manage lives. We're here so that the person who suffered, who's been seeking, can find their path.
Yeah. I think you certainly have helped others find their path today. Thank you so much, Donna. You've been
welcome.
courageous and generous with your message. Thank you so much for taking your time and being my guest today on 12 Steps and 12 Questions. You were wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm always humbled to be asked. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Right. That was great. We're still rolling. I really enjoyed myself. That was really, really great. Thank you so much, Donna. Did you find that did you leave everything on the field, or is there anything that you felt needs to be said still also?
No, you know why? Because I told you, I don't know. And I don't have to get ready. I just have to be ready. And I always feel like what I shared is what I shared.
Great. Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you again, Donna. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-Step Recovery Program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-Step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.